All right, hello folks. Today we're going to be working with seafood, and I'm going to start out with two recipes simultaneously because of the time sequence involved in the preparation of those. So the first one I'm going to start on is the chowder. So for the chowder, you've got a measure of clam juice, and I'm going to put that into a saucepan along with the potatoes. The potatoes are in acidified water, which means I have a little bit of lemon juice in ratio to water to be able to keep the potatoes from turning brown once they've been cut. So I'm going to bring both of those to a simmer over a moderate heat. So you'll notice that I'm using this grill as a resource because I only have two burners to work with, and that's going to work out just fine. The other recipe I'm going to start on is for the rice. And for the rice, I'd like to have that chicken stock preheated so it's at a simmer. I wouldn't let it come to a boil and evaporate some of that liquid, because you need that liquid in ratio to be able to suffice the preparation of the rice. The rice is going to start with clarified butter, which I have done in advance for you. And basically, clarified butter is butter that's been cooked and it is brought to a simmer until it becomes nice and clear. Once it's nice and clear, you skim off the foam, separate it from that milky, watery stuff we call whey, and you'll have what's left behind as a disc of clarified butter. That is going to melt down in the saucepan along with some oil. The reason I add the oil is to prevent that butter from cooking too hard too fast. So I've got the chicken stock for the rice started, fats cooking and heating up, clam juice and water in a saucepan getting started to get hot. So in the saucepan that we have for the chowder, I'm going to put in a portion of whole butter, and behind that I'm going to put in some pre-cooked chopped bacon. I cook the bacon in advance to avoid too much fat being in the chowder for health purposes, as well as not having a lot of fats floating on the top of the chowder when it's finished. That's the logic behind that. So both of those skillets with the fats, or saucepans with the fats, we want to get hot enough to where you can see that butter melt. On the rice, we're going to start out with the onions that have been chopped. And we're going to let those just briefly sweat until they become translucent. You don't want to get too much color on them, just nicely sweat. Behind that, you're going to put in the measure of rice. Rice is typically 2 parts liquid to 1 part of the rice product, and that's what's going to work for that. I put that rice in there. Keep an eye on the bacon and move that around with whatever spoon spatula that you like to work with. Rice, move that around a little bit. So we are making sure that we're not cooking the onion too long and the rice doesn't get any color on it. Now that the bacon's rendered out, we have now a fair measure of fat. Onions are diced, going into the chowder. Chowder is a nice item to have during the winter months. Just today's first day of fall, so it's a nice common item to have for this type of year. We're also going to add to the onion mixture 1 bay leaf for the rice. So the rice gets a bay leaf. Once you're able to get that chicken stock to a simmer, even if it doesn't come to a simmer, the reason why I like to simmer it ahead of time is that it reduces the cook time of the rice. So once you've achieved translucent appearance of the onion, add in the chicken stock. At that point, it should come into a boil relatively quickly. All right, so we've got the chowder cooking with the onion and the bacon. When the onion becomes translucent, you can add the celery. Celery pieces, I just basically take the rib of the celery, cut it in half so I can handle it better, and then cut those half strips into thin strips and turn them diagonally so I can cut them into a nice small dice. Celery is added to the saucepan. Rice is at a boil, and I'll let that simmer at a relatively slow simmer so that we can manage the process of cooking it. And we want to have a lid on it as soon as it comes to a boil and reduce the heat dramatically low. And what's going to happen is the rice is going to absorb that chicken stock and the flavor of the onions, the flavor of the butter, and the infusion of the piece of bay leaf to season that a bit. Also, I think it's a good idea to salt and pepper that rice at this stage of the process. And be conscientious of the salt that you put in there, because you can always add it, but you can't take it away. But you put enough in there that you can see it. So now that I have that at a nice slow simmer, a lid that fits that saucepan is ideal. If you don't have that, a nice double layer of foil crimped on the top of the pan works out equally as well. So on the chowder, onions have been sweat a bit. Celery is now starting to cook. We want to get that celery tender enough that it's got a little give to it. Our potatoes and clam juice should be coming to a simmer. And if you have 4 burners, which most of us do at our homes, you'll be able to get all these things going on at the same time. Chowder works out lovely. You can make it today, cool it down very quickly. Like put the pan in an ice bath, a bath of ice, so you can cool it down fast, stir it so it gets very cold very quickly. Ideally cold enough to touch in a 2-hour window. And then you can reheat it. Just reheat it so it comes to a boil the next time you use it. Once it hits that boil, you're good to go. Even close to a boil. It really has to go to 165. Sounds a little complicated at home, but to where it starts to simmer and it's hot in the middle, that's about the appropriate temperature you want it to be. Now that we have the bacon fat, a little butter, celery, onion, we're going to add the measure of flour that we have. And the flour is there to use as a thickening agent for the chowder. A lot of folks like chowder that's really thick. I tell you that the chowder that we have in the Northeast states is really quite thin. It's almost milky. Something to think about as you move forward. At this point, now that we have the flour in there with the fat, what we've done is we created a roux. I'm going to add the garlic and let that garlic cook very quickly in there. Too hard, too fast, it'll burn. So now I'm going to add the potatoes and the clam juice to that pot. And that's going to help speed up the cooking process. So immediately, within a minute, it's going to thicken up significantly from that flour that we added to the fats that are in that pan. So to that, I'm going to add a sprig of thyme. I'm just going to drop it right in there, and a small bay leaf. And I'll allow those to infuse into the soup broth to give it some flavor. Before you serve it, you want to retrieve those 2 items. It's obvious, you want to get them out of there for that reason. So that leaves me behind some heavy cream, some chopped clams that are cooked in advance and they're in juice, some chopped chive, and some hot sauce, which is optional. What I did today for the hot sauce is a combination of sriracha and Tabasco. The only reason why I used a combination of sriracha and Tabasco is because the low density plastics that they make these cups out of are so delicate that over a course of time, the acidity from the vinegar and the Tabasco sauce will eat through that little cup. So I softened it up a bit with the sriracha, so you still have the delivery of a nice heat to that chowder is the main purpose behind that. So once that comes to a slow simmer, I'm going to pull it off the fire and allow it to cook at continue at a slow simmer. I'm gonna put a little pepper into it at this point, salt it a little bit later. Why? Because most of those shellfish that we have, which is the clam, so univalve, is going to have a little bit of salt matter to it. Checking that rice, make sure that it is in a nice simmer position and not boiling too hard. Boils too fast, the rice is gonna stick to the bottom of the pan. You're gonna have a little trouble later. It just won't be as much of a pleasure to cook if we have to scrub stuff. Plus your rice will scorch, it'll stick to the bottom of the pan, have a poor flavor, unless we intended to make rice that way, like Persian rice, which might be coming down the road in some of our sessions when we start to go international. The next dish we're going to prepare is a fillet of tilapia. And that tilapia fish you have in your home kits. It's in a reduced oxygen packaging unit. That unit should be thawed out in the refrigerator, usually overnight does the job. If not, you can run it under water, continuous running water. It should be cool to touch in a little pan to be able to have that water run over it. You also have a unit of flour for the tilapia. So for that tilapia, I've taken those two fillets, and all I did was split them down the center. Where there's a vertebrae, if it was a bone, it would run through the center. It's kind of a red line between those two fish. A nice straight cut on either side. And then from that, I separated the top loin, which is the top of the fish, into two parts for more even cooking style in the skillet. And I did that for both fillets. The bottom side, which is where the belly is, as it swims through, I left intact because it's going to cook nice and thin. They're going to cook very quickly. So the two fillets are cut into 6 separate pieces. That's the process on that. Chowder's simmering. I'm going to reduce the heat over here so that I can assure the potatoes are going to be tender and that the celery has a nice soft chew on it. And if the thyme leaves fall off the branch, no big deal. That's really quite okay. We're going to season this tilapia with milled salt and pepper. If you have a pepper mill at home, be conscientious of the size of the pepper that comes out of it. Sometimes you just need to make an adjustment so that it's more fine and you don't have those big pieces of pepper on your going into your dental work. Salting it. What I have left on the tray is enough to be able to salt both sides and pepper both sides. Now that I've achieved that, you have a measure of oil on your tray or in your kits. And I'm going to put oil in this skillet to the point where it starts to shimmer. Shimmer would look like penny dropping into a pond. And I'll let that oil get hot enough to where it's just almost smoking. Taking that flour and just gently dusting it. Don't lather it in the flour. It's going to be too much flour. I just want to dust it on all sides of the fish. Belly slices and the top loin that has been split. So naturally, because these top loin slices are bigger, I'm going to put those in the skillet first. And if you were to look at the fish, there's the skin side, which is going to be the softer, more rounded side of the fish. And then you have the side that's close to the vertebrae, the bone matter. And you can almost see those stripes from where the bones were on the fish. We're going to have that skin side down in the skillet. And when we put it in the skillet, we should hear the sound of this cooking immediately when we drop it in there. So those 4 slices of the top loin to go in first. And that leaves us with these 2 thinner fillets from the belly portion of the fish. While that's happening, I'm going to take a look at the chowder. Make sure that it's cooking nicely. It's come to a nice thickness, which is wonderful. Because it's a little heavy now, But we're going to add heavy cream to that and the clams with some of the clam juice. So as these potatoes become a little bit soft, I'm going to add the clams and the clam juice to the chowder. Not a lot of juice, but you don't want to cook the clams in the chowder too early because they're already steamed to a density that's going to be nice and tender. Cook them too long, they're going to be tough. Some of the ingredients you have on your tray are going to be some nice thin cuts of 3 different bell peppers. We have a yellow, a red, and a green bell pepper. We have some very fine julienne of Spanish white onion. I've got some fish stock, some sherry, so fortified wine, a little bit of garlic, some Kalamata olives. Any type of Spanish olive would work out great because this is kind of a Spanish influenced dish. And then we have what we call tomato concasse, or tomatoes that have been peeled and seeded and then cut into strips. I have a lemon that I just split in half for the intent and purpose of being able to keep it simple. And on this particular tray, we have enough fresh thyme on the stem to be able to flavor the stock when we put it in the skillet. And I saved myself a little bit of parsley that I'm going to use as an accent garnish because I like the way little accent garnishes look on plates when we plate them. The rice is working well. I still see some steam vapor. I don't want to have the lid off very long because that steam chamber allows it to cook more efficiently in the process. So now that I start to see some color around the exterior of the fish, you're going to see it's starting to show some white on there. It's okay for me to flip that fish over. And I should have a nice golden color to it. If the skillet is seasoned, like we talk about, having that oil come to a shimmer so that it's not going to, this fish is not going to stick to it, that's ideal. So we're not going to cook the fish all the way through. We're going to partially cook it because we're going to finish it off in that skillet with the sauce that's natural in the skillet. So those thin pieces from the belly are going to go into the skillet because they're going to take very little time to cook. So they all come out even. On a separate tray, I have lined with some parchment paper is where I'm going to put those fillets to rest while I'm cooking the rest of the ingredients. It's going to make a pan sauce out of this dish. So letting these thick fillets cook just long enough to where they're tender, knowing that you're going to finish cooking them in the sauce is all good. Chowder's looking good. It's cooking. I'm going to test those potatoes, usually by taking the back of the spoon with the potato on the side of the pot. You can feel if it starts to mash like a mashed potato, you should be in good shape. At that point, I'm going to add the heavy cream and allow that cream to come to a simmer. And that should be about the right consistency that we want for this clam chowder to be. It's very similar to what we'll find in restaurants in our landlocked state of Ohio. And I'm going to make sure I get those pieces of herb out of there. So these fillets, top loin fillets, I'm going to take out of the skillet and let them rest gently. You don't have to have a tray. You can use one of your dinner plates at home, whatever works. And these fillets, these belly fillets, the bottom loins, are going to cook very quickly. They don't take long at all to be able to meet that expectation. Keep that same skillet on the fire. The oil that's in that skillet is sufficient to be able to finish the preparation off. You can feel free to dump that oil and start with new oil if you wish. To me, I like it because it already has flavor. So with that, I'm going to start with the onion. The julienne cuts of onion in that skillet and let them start to pick up just a little bit of color, not a lot. So you have a lot more oil than you really need on your trays or in your home kit. Don't feel like you need to use it because you'll almost be shallow frying that tilapia if you use all that oil. So a smaller amount's okay. Let those onions cook vigorously. We don't want to burn them. We want to have them cook at just a nice, beautiful temperature so they start to pick up some color. Not caramelized, but just on the edge of caramelizing. I'm going to drop in the garlic and let that move around just briefly right behind it with the 3 bell peppers. The beautiful rainbow of red bell, yellow bell, and green bell pepper, all nice, consistently sized cuts so that they all cook at the same time frame. Now, standing up here, I can smell the sweet flavor of that garlic along with the caramelized onion. And I have to share with you, it's delightful if you like those combinations of flavors. I think they're really quite nice. At this point, I want to cool down the skillet just a bit. By doing so, I'm going to reduce the heat a little and add the sherry wine. Sherry wine is going to give it a nice flavor from the fortified wine. You can smell it right off of that. Smells wonderful, and that's going to help create some steam in that skillet. So rice is almost finished. Chowder is pretty much just now infusing the herbs into this cream with the other ingredients. As that's cooking, as the sherry wine is reduced down, I'm going to add the fish stock and allow that fish stock to come to a simmer and let it cook down a bit. That leaves you with lemon, which I just split in half because I really only need half of that lemon, not the whole thing. And move those vegetables around in that fish stock so that it simmers and allows those pieces of bell pepper to cook nice and evenly. We talked about the technique of that onion, or the tomato rather. That's going to go in there after this fish sauce. The fish stock has reduced. The fish stock has come from bones from whitefish, slowly simmered with some celery, some onion, some leeks, and a little fennel. So it has a nice clean flavor. It's hard to get those fish bones unless you buy fish whole and cut it yourself, or you might be able to go to a fish market. There's a few of them around the city that do break down fish, and they can sell you the bones from halibut and sole and those nice light, tender species of fish. Salmon and the more oily fish do not work out well for fish stocks. So keep that in mind. A white fish, wonderful for that purpose. Next, I'm going to return the fish to the skillet and allow it to finish cooking. You'll know it's done when it's nice and tender and delicate, and it pretty much falls apart. And because we have a moisture content in there, it should work out quite nicely. After I've added the fish back, I'm going to sprinkle in the tomato concasse, which again are those seeded peeled tomato pieces, which if you leave in there long enough, it's going to break down and kind of make a tomato-y type of sauce. And then we have the Greek olives. You can use any type of Spanish olive that you like to make that happen, to sprinkle those in the dish. Left behind is some chive and some hot sauce, the lemon. At this point, I'm going to take the lemon and I'm going to zest just that bright, beautiful yellow color on the outside. Using a microplane works out wonderful. Get them at the stores, find them at Target, any of those places that have a little cook center. And all you want to take off is just the white, just the bright yellow part. Avoid the white. So that's going to make for a very satisfying, bright flavor of citrus on the tilapia in its finishing cooking process. Put it in there too early, it might turn bitter because the fresh sweetness of the lemon is ideal coming in at the end. So that's right there on top. It's going to be amazing, amazing. We're going to still use that half piece of lemon as a finishing process of the fish when it comes off. So now I'm looking at the rice. I'm going to use a spoon or a spatula to kind of fluff it up a little bit to make sure it's nice and light. It's fully cooked. It's absorbed. And I'm going to turn off the heat completely, put the lid back on it, allow it to keep warm so it simmers. For the chowder, we're done with it at this point. Stirring it around. It looks fabulous. I have to make sure it tastes good. I think everything we put in there, less some salt. We'll see if it needs any salt. A little bit. Bacon's a little salty. The fish clam stock is a little salty. Man, this is good stuff. Really, really good. So, using the tongs, we're going to fish out the thyme. You want to try and find that bay leaf. Kind of like, where's Waldo? It's such a small piece. I always think I've got it, and then I don't. It's easy to find when you're eating it. If you have a group of people over, you can consider it a door prize for somebody who found it. Just going to ladle that fish into either individual cups or into the bowl. This is going to be more of a family style presentation of that. If I see that bay leaf, I'll pull it out. I don't suggest you break it up unless you're okay with eating it, which is an option. Certainly okay to eat a bay leaf. Won't hurt you, just kind of gets stuck in your mouth for a minute. And then I'm going to put in that fish sauce and that hot sauce if you like it. Certainly feel free to put that in there. It's going to kind of drop it in a few spots. It's really an option. It's not too terribly hot. It gives it a nice zip of flavor. And then we're going to finish it with some chives. You can either put them dead center, or you can put them around the exterior of the bowl, just for a nice accent garnish. And the chives are nice and mild, of the onion family, have a delicious flavor, and I think help lift that dish a good bit. To finish that off at home, I might serve saltine crackers, some dry breadsticks. Oyster crackers would be ideal if you want to add more carb to that dish. That would be lovely. Rice is done, steamy hot. We're simply going to plate that rice with some rice in the center of the plate. This is if I was to plate it at home. Has a nice polished look to it. A little bit of golden color from the value and the quality of the chicken stock that we used. I have the bay leaf right here that I'm just going to fish out and set off to the side so we don't get it later. And then I'm going to finish off by adding the citrus juice to the fish in the skillet. Whatever you can squeeze out of there is going to be fantastic. Then just simply plate the fish. I'll usually take the belly piece and drop it down there on top of the rice, and then a couple pieces of the top loin with some bell peppers, tomatoes, olives in between each of the layers, and top it off with the larger piece of the top loin right there on top. Pull off the thyme leaf, kind of rest it on there, and if I have any type of liquid left behind in my skillet, I might take that liquid and drop it on top. And then if you have an herb, I like to use only herbs that you could eat and enjoy. Something like thyme would not be a good choice of herb to use for a garnish, but I think a nice piece of flat leaf parsley is ideal to finish that dish off. So you have a nice rice pilaf, classical preparation of the rice pilaf, and a lovely New England style clam chowder, all of which make lovely meal cooking with seafood. Enjoy.